Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. I've been referring a lot to my period of homeschool burnout in some of my videos, so I thought that today I should actually talk about what happened so that you know what I'm actually alluding to. Um, I never really planned on homeschooling my kids. Actually, my oldest son, when he went off to school, I had never heard of homeschooling. I never actually heard of it until he was in about second grade. And it was kind of just a passing reference. I worked with someone who was homeschooled, and I just thought, oh, that's neat. And I didn't really think much else about it. By the time that my oldest was in middle school, he started to ask me about homeschooling, and he wanted me to homeschool him. And at this point, I did have two other kids in school, and I had a total of 6 kids when he asked. So I was a little overwhelmed, but the thought intrigued me. So instead of going online to see, homeschooling websites, how to homeschool, things like that, I immediately looked up homeschool curriculum, which was the wrong thing to do because I looked on there and I just thought to myself, I saw all these different choices and I saw the prices and I just thought, there's no way I can do this. And so I just wrote it off. Then about a year later, my son, actually it wasn't about a year later, it was actually a few years later. I don't know, my timeline's a little messed up now. But anyway, sometime later, by the time that my son was in ninth grade, he had just started ninth grade, I was starting to get a little irritated with our school. I didn't like the way that I felt like I was a secondary authority to my kids. I felt like the school was the primary authority and I was the secondary authority. And I didn't really like a lot of the things that were going on. Like my kids would get sick at school all the time. And because there were other kids at school sick. And when you have a large family, it kind of goes around and around and around. And so my kids, they missed a lot of school. So we would get notes from the school saying, your kids are missing too much school. But the reason that my kids were missing school was because they were getting sick at school. So it was kind of really a dilemma for us. And then I was just starting to notice that I wasn't really liking the things that were being taught in the schools. So when my son was in ninth grade, I was already kind of contemplating homeschooling by now. I was expecting my 7th baby. And I had met a woman at a new church who was expecting her 6th baby, and she was homeschooling and had homeschooled from the beginning. So I had actually found somebody who could inspire me to think, yeah, maybe I can do this. So the one day, my 9th grader, he brought home this project that he had to do. My 14-year-old was supposed to do an oral report on the female condom, and it had to have visual aids. I was livid. I was livid. And I know that some parents don't care about that, but as a Christian and as somebody who was extremely conservative even before I became a Christian, this really, really bothered me, and I was quite furious. And that was pretty much, the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. So that was the year that I began to homeschool. And I've always been, well, not always, I'm not in school anymore, but when I was in school, I was one of those kids who always did really well in school. I never had any issues. Everything always came like that to me, except for geometry proofs. By the time that I got to high school, I hated that. And I really didn't like building circuits in physics class. But other than that, everything seemed to come really quickly to me. So when I started homeschooling my kids, of course, I was going to model the traditional school system because that's what I knew and I thought it worked for me. So that's what I did. So I, got a little chalkboard and I went to a thrift store and I got little desks, where they could put their books inside, and I really set up a classroom. I had posters all over the walls of, ABCs and adding. And I'm not saying that any of these things are bad, but I went way overboard in trying to be school at home. And I actually did have another mother, besides the one who had 6 kids. I had another mother who had homeschooled, and she actually offered to let me come in and sit through one of their homeschool days. She was using 5 in a row, and she offered to let me sit through that. And I declined because, honestly, I thought to myself, I know how school works. I didn't know how homeschooling worked, though, and I really wish I would have taken her up on that offer because I was pretty terrible, I'm going to say. My poor kids had to raise their hands if they had to go to the bathroom, if they had a question, if they had anything to say. Yeah, they had to raise their hands. We had to get everything done that I had written down for my lesson. And by this point, I was not structuring my own lessons. Now, I was using 5 in a row. So that really was a godsend. I had borrowed it from the one who offered to let me come to her house. And so that was actually a godsend. But my problem came when I found out that the school district also has to supply you with free textbooks. And at the time I thought, oh, free textbooks. And not realizing that 5 in a row already covered all the subjects. So I went to the school, got the textbooks, and added those on top of the 5 in a row. So I wasn't taking advantage of the fact that 5 in a row was cross-curricular because I really didn't understand what that meant. So we were doing 5 in a row, and then separately they were still doing every single subject. And I was really, really strict about them getting everything done every single day. So it got to the point that when it came time at the end of the year, I had to return the textbooks, and we went on and I purchased some more unit studies that I found at a flea market, and they were awesome unit studies. And again, they were cross-curricular, but still in this school mindset, I didn't get that you weren't supposed to use anything else with them except for maybe language arts and math. So we were doing these awesome unit studies, painting murals of tropical rainforests and researching what sorts of animals live in the different layers and, just fantastic activities. But then I would tack on all of the other school books that by this point I had gone to a teacher supply store and gotten all sorts of workbooks for every single subject. And I was like, Tuesday and Thursday we do science, Monday and Wednesday we do social studies, Friday we do art, on top of the unit studies. I can't say that enough. So we did this for about 2 years, and I was pretty exhausted. By now I was expecting my 8th child. So yeah, I had pretty much had it, and by this time, my oldest son, the one who actually asked me to homeschool him, he hated it. I totally ruined it for him, and he asked me if he could go back to school for 11th and 12th grade. I was so exhausted. I said, sure, why not? And just around that time, I took my other kids for a walk, and we walked past the school, and we noticed that the school was having an open house because they had added a new wing. And I said to the kids, hey, let's just go take a look around and see what it looks like in there now. Well, I'm sure you can guess what happened next. I asked my kids, hey, do you guys want to go back to school? And they said yes, because who wouldn't? I was a tyrant. I was a homeschool tyrant. I really was. So I sent the kids back to school. And at first, it was nice. I had a quiet house. Now, mind you, I still had some littles at home, and I was expecting, but the house was quiet. I was able to get the house clean. Like, my house was spotless for the first time in ages. And I remember at the beginning of the year, it was fall, and I used to love opening up my living room window and just listening to the crickets chirp, because I had never been able to hear that before because my house was always too noisy. So at first, yeah, it was nice, and it was a novelty to the kids. They were excited. But over time, I started to realize that this wasn't what I should have done. My kids were coming home from school every single day, fighting all the time. They weren't used to being with each other anymore because they were in school 7 hours a day. And of course, being the nerdy mom that I am, I signed them up for just about every after-school program I could get my hands on. So by the time that they got home from school, everybody was fighting. They were fighting because they hadn't seen each other all day. They were fighting because they weren't used to being around each other anymore. And then they were fighting over who got to ask mom for help with their homework first. And I'm going to tell you, if you help your kids with homework, you can homeschool. Because to me, there is nothing more frustrating than having all of these kids come at you at the same time from all these different directions. They've been learning things in school all day. You have no clue what they've been learning about, but you're supposed to be able to help all of them. And I'm not saying that I didn't know how to help them, but it was just nice when we were homeschooling because I had been working with them every single day throughout each day. And it was just a much calmer and relaxed pace for us. So that really started to bother me. Another thing that bothered me were just all of the papers that I constantly had to sign, fundraisers, school pictures. I was really getting overwhelmed. And then my kids got lice. Now, by this point, I was expecting my ninth baby. Yeah, I'm always, well, okay, I'm not now, but usually in the past, I was always expecting a baby at some time. So by now, I was expecting my ninth child, and my kids brought home lice. And so we had a household of 10 people, and everybody except for me and my husband got lice. It was awful. I tried the over-the-counter lice treatment. I tried all of those. I tried the Cetaphil treatment that the doctors told me to try, and I tried all of these home remedy ones. Nothing worked. I was furious. I called the school to question them about this, and the answer that I got from the principal was, we do not notify parents if a classmate has lice because lice is not a health issue, it's a social issue. And I take issue with that because if there is a bug sucking the blood out of my child's head, to me, that's a health issue. So I was pretty ticked. And the thing is that when these kids that had lice were found to have it in school, they were sent home, all they had to bring back to school was either an empty box of lice treatment or they had to bring a receipt showing that they had purchased it. They weren't even checking their heads again. So my kids they were going to school with lice in their hair because I couldn't get it out. It took months till I could get this lice out of their hair. And while all this was going on, we had the morning rush. Every morning, my kids had missing shoes, missing backpacks, missing homework. They couldn't find their lunch money. There was always something missing in the morning. And now I do want to point out that I did lay everything out every night before school. But when you've got a family that size and you've got a bunch of littles running around, it doesn't always work out that way, the way that you want it to. So every morning was a rush. And I ended up, and I feel terrible about this, but I always ended up yelling at my kids before they would go to school in the morning. So that's the last thing that they would remember when I took them to school was mom yelling at them. And you know what? That's not the way that any child should have to go through a school day. So finally, I started to think about homeschooling again. My second grade daughter by this time was having issues with a boy in her class, which I did allude to in one of my other recent videos. He was, I'm not gonna mince words, he was terrible. He used to beat the teacher up. He ripped a necklace off of her the one time. He used to run around the class and dump all the baskets of books out. The school was getting put on lockdown at least once a week for this child. It was bad. And my daughter, I'm going to say, she came home from school upset every single day. She loved her teacher. She really did. And I used to send the teacher cards for encouragement all the time because I knew what she was going through. But at the same time, my daughter was afraid to go to school, not just because of this violent child, but because the teacher would spend the entire day screaming at the top of her lungs at this kid. So when my daughter came home from school and told me that the boy that day had thrown a desk and my daughter actually got hit in the leg with it, yeah, I knew it was time to do something about this. Now let me just say that, the school, they'll let you know when your child gets a scratch or a cut on the playground. But oddly enough, I got no note about my daughter getting hit in the leg with a desk. So I called the school district and I said I wanted to speak to the superintendent, and they asked why. So I told her, and she said, oh, well, you need to go up the chain of command. First, you need to talk to the teacher and then the principal, and then you can talk to the superintendent. I said, well, I already talked to the teacher several times. And then she said, well, then you need to talk to the principal. So I called the principal and I just told her everything that I was concerned about. And basically, this is what she said. There are certain protocols that have to be followed. There really isn't much that we can do right now. I'm sorry. It's like, you're sorry. Okay. Well, the children in this class are getting no sort of education at all. The teacher is being abused. My daughter was hurt, and you're sorry. But oddly enough, a week later, my daughter did tell me that the boy was gone. He was actually out of school for about a month. When he came back, my daughter said he was a different person. I don't know if my call was the catalyst for that. I have no idea, but I think that it helped in some way. But my point is that no child should have to go through this. And there are so many other things. Just as I felt before I ever started homeschooling, I was again getting that feeling that my kids were no longer my own. Again, my kids were getting sick all the time. So I was getting the notes from the school district stating that my kids were missing too much school when the reason they were getting sick was because of other kids in school. And it almost feels like when you're calling your kids off of school, it almost feels like you're asking permission. Is it okay if I keep my child home from school today? Well, you know what? To me, they're my kids, and I don't need to ask permission from anyone. And that's pretty much how it is with vacations too. You want to take your kid on vacation, you have to fill out a form and get permission from the school. And I think that's wrong. We are the parents. So at one point, it was still while I was expecting number 9. I used to have to go to have non-stress tests done twice a week. I think my fluid with her might have been a little high. I don't really remember why I had to go, but twice a week I had to go for non-stress tests. And I would take my daughter, who was in kindergarten, with me because she was in PM kindergarten. So we would go for the non-stress tests, and then I would take her to PM kindergarten. Well, during the one non-stress test, the doctors grew really concerned because the baby was not reacting as she should have been to the to the stimulus and everything that they were doing. And they were really concerned about it. And they said to me, you need to stay here and you cannot leave until we are comfortable that everything is okay. I was really worked up. I called the school and I explained the situation to them. And the secretary actually had the nerve to tell me that this would count as an unexcused absence because it didn't have anything to do with my daughter. There's another strike against the school. I again, furious. I was furious. And that's not the only time that I was told that at a really bad time. At another point, our school was constantly having bomb threats. And the one day I drove past, because they didn't inform us when the schools had bomb threats. We would just find out from our kids later. So the one time I drove past the school and I saw all of the kids standing out on the sidewalk. And I saw fire trucks there. So I pulled over and I asked one of the teachers, what's going on? Bomb threat. I said, okay, that's it. So I grabbed my kids, walked up to the principal, and I told her we're leaving. And again, she had the audacity to say to me, well, this is going to be unexcused. Unexcused because I'm taking my children home in the middle of a bomb threat. Yes, this is what schools do. And I'm going to tell you that I know that there are a lot of people who really, really have no problems with their kids in public schools. But with my experience, I have found that when your children are in public school, they truly are not your own. You truly are a secondary parent. And schools do have the right, they're considered in loco parentis. They are in charge of your kids while you're not there. And at times, I think that they believe they're in charge of your kids before you are. And that's wrong. So all of this was going on, and I thought to myself, I really miss homeschooling. I miss being with my kids. I don't care that the house is quieter now. I don't care that the house is cleaner. Things were, even with my tyrannical homeschooling days, things were so much better. So I started researching unit studies, actually to find out what they really were. Come to find that, hey, I don't have to use anything additional with unit studies. That's the whole point of them, which I should have done before. I read some books by John Holt, John Taylor Gatto. They completely changed the way that I looked at school. So when I brought my kids back out of school, I was able to relax a little bit and to know that school is not the only option. And yeah, it did take me some time to really get out of that school mindset. I found even for a couple of years, I would fall back to it every now and then. But now all this time later, I'm pretty much completely out of that, and things are so much better now. My kids are learning so much better. They enjoy learning. They like learning. They get along. Now, I'm not going to say they always get along because all siblings fight. They get along so much better. They play together. Our mornings are no longer rushed. We no longer have to rush around in the morning looking for everything. We can now, just sit on the couch watching some TV and having a slow breakfast together. We can start school at 10. And when my kids are sick, we can take the day off and I don't have to answer to anybody. So this is probably a pretty long video, so I apologize for that. If you've gotten through till the end, thank you. But this is my story of homeschool burnout. So if you see me referring to it in any of my other videos, or if you have heard me referring to it, now you have a better look at what that was all about for me. If you have a similar story, I would love to read about it in the comments. Also, I keep forgetting to say this on all of my videos. If you're looking for an encouraging homeschool community, I do have a group that I will link to the bottom in the description box that you can join. It's on Facebook, and you can join that and you can find any sort of encouragement, tips, advice, camaraderie, anything. It's so much fun. We've got a great group of people there. So anyway, give this video a like if you like it, subscribe if you have liked it, and I hope you have a great day.